Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'll be talking about Season 2, Episode 8, The Heart Attack. Hello everyone! It's good to be back. I took a week off. We went on a family vacation for 8 days and it was very fun. Lots of great adventures and great memories made, but happy to be back. 8 days is a long time for our family. We usually don't do long trips like that. And we kind of don't know why. Well, we do know why. I shouldn't say that. My husband's work a lot of times gets very, very busy. And so he finds it hard to maybe get away for that long. And then also my husband and I we weren't the biggest enthusiasts about taking very small children on long road trips or plane rides. We were those parents that were like, all right, we can do like a long weekend. We're not going to handle these kids for that long on a big trip. But my kids are now at the age where it's really fun. They're excited about hanging out with us still, and they love the adventure of traveling and, doing these things that my husband and I want to do versus kind of they're not really leading the entertainment or the adventure. We are. And they're just up for it. And so I'm really happy that we're making sure to take advantage of this time, because I know eventually they're going to not want to hang out with us and everything we do is going to be lame. I find myself doing that a lot. I'm always bracing myself for this big change in my kids' desire to be around us. And it's going to happen, I'm pretty sure. I mean, they're so like into us right now. It's a weird way to put it, but they are. I mean, they love to hang out with me and my husband, their parents. And so we're really trying to take advantage of this time where they really want to be around us and we want to take vacations. And we were even saying, my husband and I, we need to make sure and just make a point to at least once a year plan something really fun. We went to Zion, Utah, first time there, incredibly gorgeous. And then from Zion, we took a little day trip to Bryce Canyon, which was, words just really don't exist to describe how beautiful these places are, both of them, Zion and Bryce. And then we did a family hike in Zion in what's called the Narrows. So it's just this deep canyon where you hike in the Virgin River, which was such a great experience. It was very tiring. We were so proud of our kids. They were such troopers. It wasn't easy to hike through the river for over 5 hours, and they did it. And they had their ups and downs. There were a lot of emotions about frustrations and being cold and then being too hot and then being hungry, even though we packed snacks. But at the end, they were so proud of themselves that they did it. And gosh, we couldn't have been prouder of them either. So some really great memories made on this trip, and I'm so happy to be back. So let's get into it. The synopsis for this episode from my coffee table book is as follows. George's false alarm heart attack lands him in the hospital for a tonsillectomy. He visits Kramer's holistic healer, played by Stephen Tobolowsky, whose less expensive treatment turns George purple. Jerry struggles to recall a joke he wrote down in the middle of the night, while Elaine dates a doctor who is obsessed with the wrong parts of her anatomy. Wow, that's an interesting way to put it. This episode is written by Larry Charles. All right, so the first couple scenes are just really quick, and it's Jerry waking up on his couch. He sees this weird movie on the TV, and then we see Jerry wake up in bed. In the next little scene, write something down while chuckling to himself and then going back to sleep. And the next scene is at Monk's. George, Jerry, and Elaine are having lunch. George brings his own cucumber. He needs cucumber, and they don't put cucumber in the salad. In fact, I think he says they refuse to put cucumber in the salad, and I need cucumber. Jerry is trying to decipher this note, and he cannot, for the life of him, figure out what he wrote down. He thinks, fax me some halibut. Elaine looks at it and thinks it says, don't mess with Johnny. Did you mess with Johnny, Jerry? It was kind of a interesting way for her to say that line, but I liked it. George asks to see the note. As he's looking at it, he starts feeling something in his chest. Also, Elaine trades him the note for the cucumber. She likes this cucumber idea. She starts cutting it into her own salad. George then says, I think I'm having a heart attack. And Jerry says, I don't think that's it. And then we see George in more distress. I like that Elaine very calmly says, I think he thinks he's having a heart attack. Oh, he's having a heart attack. And so this is sort of the first glimpse into the group's lack of compassion. And I'm glad that Elaine is a part of that. We're seeing this emergence of the Elaine character from the sort of overly sensitive persona from the earlier episodes into this more cutting presence, on par with the men. It's nice to see that finally happening. And this moment actually, to me, really distantly echoes what we see in the future with Susan dying. There's almost no reaction to something that's maybe shocking or maybe would elicit extreme reaction, but they're just very sort of calm about it. And there's more of a stating the obvious versus showing what would be the quote unquote appropriate emotion. And this is in contrast to what I think maybe season 1, or I guess pre-Larry Charles writing Elaine, would have done. I feel like before this point, she would have been very concerned and she probably would have reprimanded Jerry. Jerry, he's having a heart attack or something like that. She would have been mad at Jerry for doubting him, and she would have been more concerned about George. But again, I like that this is very consistent with the Elaine that's more familiar to us in later seasons. George just keeps increasingly feeling all these symptoms. Jerry knows it's because he watched Coronary Country on PBS. I called him. I told him not to watch it. There was nothing else on. He admits that he did watch it. And look, I felt really seen during this moment. I'm bad at this. I am a hypochondriac. There's been many, many times in my life I've convinced myself of many illnesses. In fact, my husband knew this about me so well that when I got pregnant with my daughter, my firstborn, he banned me from looking at the internet. He's like, please don't look at the internet. Don't look up articles. If there is an article, don't click on it. Just please stay off the internet. I agreed. I totally did, because I knew for my own mental health and that probably the health of my child too, because I would be less stressed. I did not do anything with researching on the internet. I talked to my doctor if I had concerns or anything, but yeah, I did. I just knew myself too well. I said, if I read something or if I look at something, if I happen upon something that will make me believe that something's wrong with my pregnancy or my health, I will believe it and I will make myself crazy. Elaine and Jerry aren't taking him seriously. Elaine's in fact just still eating her salad. She's not that concerned until Jerry says, fine, we'll take you to the hospital. The purpose of the scene, this is the setup scene, even though it's not technically the first scene. This is where George's heart attack occurs, and that's really what drives the entire episode. My overall take, well, kind of just to get into this scene being the setup versus the very first scene, I like that they did that. This is just another improvement I feel that Larry Charles has brought to the show as a writer. So the scenes with Jerry's middle of the night note, they do set up a runner in the episode. It's not really setting up the A story. It's setting up this runner that does kind of go out through the episode, but I like that they sort of switched it up, and it's not the formula of, okay, this very first scene right out the gate has to set up all the elements of the episode. And this is something I'm definitely going to remember when I'm doing my own writing. I want to use different ways to introduce different elements of the story, where it's not necessarily let's have the first scene be everything to set up the entire episode. Just like this one, the first couple scenes just set up a runner, and that's pretty cool. So back to the specifics of this scene, it's fine. It's, most of it is about Jerry's note, and then it quickly turns to George's heart attack. Apparently the cucumber bit was due to Larry David's affinity to do this, and that is not surprising at all. It got me thinking, if I were to bring an outside ingredient to a restaurant, what would it be? I'm just going to keep it specific to salad. Well, I guess no. So my ingredient I would bring everywhere would be an avocado. I love avocado so much. I really do eat some avocado in some form every single day. I could really put it on anything, to be quite honest. And if I did bring it for a salad, that way I could skip the dressing and maybe save some calories. I like that option as well. That's what I do at home. I do know people, and this wouldn't be my jam, but I do know people who bring hot sauce with them wherever they go. And one of those people is Beyonce. I got hot sauce in my bag, swag. That's off of Lemonade, the song Formation. You're welcome for that education. But yeah, I can't, unfortunately, I do have a love for spiciness, but as I'm getting older and older, unless I have Tums in my bag, I really can't handle too much spice anymore. It's depressing. This whole cucumber thing too, it feels like a call forward, if you will, to when they brought Jerry and his quote unquote wife brought maple syrup to monks in a future episode. Also wanted to mention, I'm not sure the point of asking about Kramer, aside from Jerry being able to deliver the joke. I don't know, that's like asking, where's Waldo? Maybe it was just to remind us that there is a fourth in the group and he's just not there. But I also thought it was kind of sweet that Elaine was the one wondering where he was. So the next scene is in the hospital. George is in his hospital bed and he's got a tube up his nose. Not a very convincing tube up the nose, I have to say. But there's a moaning man on the other side of the curtain. George introduces himself to him. Jerry asks a nurse about the note. She thinks it's salami bologna. Oh, and the doc sees Jerry and says, oh, your friend didn't have a heart attack. I'll be right in a second. With that knowledge, Jerry messes with George, asks for his Blackhawks jacket. If George dies, what about Susan Davis? Can I ask her out? And George just gets really depressed. He says, I'm finished. It's all over for me. Let's end it right now. And then we see this moment that's often included in all these compilation episodes where Jerry does smother George with the pillow. And Elaine kind of interrupts it. Jerry? Elaine, what are you doing here? And George calls him a jerk off. Larry Charles was pretty surprised that got past the censors. I kind of think so too. So Elaine enters. Jerry clues her in and says, it wasn't a heart attack. He's fine. So she jumps on the bandwagon to mess with George and asks, is anybody getting your apartment? Great consistency. More apartment stuff. Elaine still needs a new apartment. The doctor enters. Ooh, Elaine is immediately smitten. She's standing really close to him. He's talking to George. She's just kind of looking at him googly-eyed, and it's very sweet. Now, George didn't have a heart attack, but looks like his tonsils grew back. Oh, his tonsils grow back. I love Elaine flirting. I'll get more into that in a little bit, but Elaine is flirting with tonsil material. I mean, I think only Elaine could do that. I like Jerry's, it's like the Capulets and the Montagues. So this dreamy doctor recommends surgery for George. And as he leaves, he and Elaine just can't seem to get out of each other's way. They have this little moment of just kind of being close to each other and giggling. And after he exits, she kind of has this pause and says, I just have to ask the doctor one more question. I butchered that totally, but I really liked the way she delivered that line. It's a little bit too bizarre, but again, it works for me. I really just like how she's not apologetic at all. She's like, yeah, you guys know what I'm doing, but I'm just going to say I have to ask him a question, and we know what the question is. And after Elaine exits, there's a very almost rehearsed stand-up line. It didn't flow very well. I just wanted to point that out. But Jerry says, women go after doctors like men go after models. They want someone with knowledge of the body. We just want the body. Like, who says that in actual conversation? But whatever. They needed to have that in there. Kramer arrives with a tray full of food. He's full of questions, comments, opinions. And he convinces George, don't get a tonsil operation here. Go to my herbalist, Tor Ekman. You need to go to him because of what happened to Bob Sacamano and the whole problem with hospitals and the medical establishment. So let's face it, George is a cheap person, so he goes with that since it's $38. So the purpose of this scene, we move the story forward. George didn't have a heart attack. He just needs tonsil and adenoid surgery. And Kramer convinces him to see Tor and get his issue taken care of with a holistic healer versus a medical doctor. And Elaine meets a cute medical doctor. My overall take, that a lot happens in this scene. It's a pretty long scene, and it's pretty good. Now, focusing on the Elaine portion of this, her reaction to the doctor. I mean, look, this is a very stereotypical portrayal of what women find attractive, as illustrated by Jerry's kind of punchline response after she walks out. It doesn't really bother me, honestly, given the time and the tone of when this was written. Honestly, also because I grew up in the Indian community, and becoming and or marrying a doctor was pretty much the goal, or held in very high regard, I should say. So this rings pretty true for me. But what I do focus on is how she takes the reins to ask him out. And I love that. That's our Elaine. And Larry Charles, so he does a commentary, and I'll get more into that later. But in the commentary, he does mention how it was a pretty liberating move to show a female character lusting sexually after someone in the same way as a man would. And that was rare in a sitcom at the time. And so when he said that, I kind of had this thought. I was like, well, wait a second. I have a couple other characters I can think of just right off the bat before Elaine. So specifically, I thought of Mona from Who's the Boss, the horny mom, Angela's mom, and Blanche from Golden Girls, right? Both were very famously horny women. But then when I thought about it, those parts of their character, that was really their whole character. And it was sort of a gimmick. Them being overly horny was played for laughs. And for Elaine, this was just a very honest reaction from Elaine. And wanting this doctor or lusting after him or wanting him sexually, that didn't define her entire character. So kudos, Larry Charles. He's right. I couldn't refute the fact that it wasn't a fair comparison. That my first thought of like, wait, Mona was super horny and Blanche was super horny. But with Elaine, it was just part of who she was. It wasn't a defining characteristic that she was all about. It was just like, hey, I'm just a human being who gets horny for doctors. So the next scene is at Tor's place. Elaine's not in this scene, but I did want to mention really quick. George mentions he's 33 years old. What? I literally had to pause it and was like, oh my God. I guess for me, it's so difficult to see these characters as younger than I am now. I don't know. When I watched these episodes as like a young teenager, they just all seemed, everyone in the cast just seemed like perpetually 40 to me, which was the age I associated with like a full-grown adult who worked in an office. I mean, it wasn't very scientific, but I was just like, I don't know, they're 40. And so when he said 33, and it probably didn't shock me, obviously, when I was a teenager, because 33, 40, same difference. But I don't know. As a 42-year-old woman watching it now, I was like, what the hell? He's 33? It's so hard to make that shift in my head that George was ever younger than me. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that. Moving on to the next scene, we see the ever familiar end of date scene in a car with Elaine and the doctor. And this is another series of kind of ping-ponging between two scenes, Elaine's date and Tor's house where George is getting his treatment. This is another device kind of becoming common. It happened in The Statue, it happened in The Revenge, where we're seeing this back and forth between two scenes. So we see in quick succession what's happening with all the characters in the cast, which is really cool. I like that they're doing that. And the doctor is holding Elaine's tongue and just explaining the anatomy of it. And I like that all Julia Louis-Dreyfus is doing in this very, very short scene is just going, I mean, even though this weirdo is holding her tongue and explaining how it works and the anatomy of it, something no one would enjoy. Elaine is still being so polite without, and her eyes are big, like, okay, I'm listening. And the lengths will go to just be polite, right? I just think that needs to be noted. We go back to Tor's place. George has to drink this tea. Then we get to the ambulance because the tea has made George's face purple. The EMTs are fighting because one ate some chuckles that I don't know, honestly really did not care for the whole ambulance fighting crap. So then let's go back to the end of Elaine's date with the doctor. He's still holding her tongue. Finally, she does ask him to let go of her tongue. And then he goes in for a kiss. And she says, "A kiss? With a tongue?" Yeah, she's not into it. And I don't blame her. This guy's a weirdo. Why is he so obsessed with tongues? I don't know. Anyway, the purpose of the scene, well, to show that this doc is a total oddball and wants to give her medical lessons about her tongue. My overall take on the scene, it's okay. It shows how odd the doctor is, and Elaine gets the laugh line at the end. But overall, there's just not a lot of substance to it. I would have loved to trade some of the dumb ambulance fight stuff for more of this date interaction, because it didn't excite me. And it was actually based on, I'm really getting into the extras now, and that's fine. But the whole fight between the two EMTs and the ambulance was based on a true story. I guess Larry David had read an article where the very thing happened. The two guys got in a fight, and I think maybe the patient in the back had died or something. It was some big story, but yeah, I just didn't really care for it in this episode. So we go back to the ambulance. They crash. Back to the hospital. Jerry enters with the foam collar because he's injured from the ambulance crash. This reminded me of the meeting with NBC, and you just see someone with one of those foam collars and you just start laughing. And that's what happened. Jerry enters George's hospital room with the foam collar. Big laugh. George can't talk. He had his surgery, and he has lotion all over to get rid of the purple hue on his skin, thanks to Tor's tea. Elaine enters. She can't stay long, though. She doesn't want to run into Dr. Tongue. She brought George ice cream. Finally, the ice cream he never got from his first tonsil surgery. Jerry sees on the TV the flaming globes of Sigmund and figures out, that's it, that's the note, flaming globes of Sigmund. I mean, this couldn't have been, he sounded like he was doing an impression of himself in that moment. That's not funny. And it wasn't funny. So the purpose of the scene, of course, wrap up all the plots, and it's okay, it's not the best. But I do like that Jerry's note ended up meaning nothing at all. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break, and I'll see you on the other side. I'm a no-nonsense mom of 3, and you know what? Menus are not the boss of me. That's right. Hi, I'm Amberly Taylor, founder and president of Ladies Against Menu Discrimination. How many times have you gone to a restaurant and have been told, "I'm sorry, no substitutions," or "Nope, we don't have that," or "Ma'am, you're not allowed to bring your own Mike's Hard Lemonade into this Chuck E. Cheese"? Last I checked, this is America, land of the free. And nowhere in my Constitution does it say that menus can rule what I can and cannot eat at a restaurant of my choice. Ladies Against Menu Discrimination is a group for people who feel strongly about food freedom. Patriots who want to fight against the laminated communism that has taken over our restaurants. We believe in BYOWYW. Bring your own whatever you want. If you want to be part of the menu freedom movement, call 555-MENU. That's 555-MENYOU, because men, you, for you. Leave a voicemail stating your name and address, and you will receive an official Ladies Against Menu Discrimination decal. And as soon as we find a platform that will host our preferred social media website, you can order a handmade tote bag big enough to carry whatever you want to add to your meal that is not on their precious menu. If you're tired of being imprisoned by the radical restaurant restrictions, then you belong with us. Ladies Against Menu Discrimination. Because it's my mouth. And we're back. So the extras, I mentioned that the commentary was done by Larry Charles. He's the writer of this episode, and he was inspired to write this storyline because around this time, he and so many of his friends always thought they were having heart attacks, apparently. They were just kind of paranoid about it. Any kind of twinge or pain, they just immediately thought, this is it, we're having a heart attack. And so that was the inspiration. Larry Charles also had a pad next to his bed and would jot down ideas often in the middle of the night. and they'd be completely illegible by morning. And so he thought this would be a good comedian's dilemma for the Jerry storyline. Larry Charles also mentioned, much like me and George in this episode, he's susceptible to the power of persuasion. And just like the whole coronary country thing that Jerry says about George, Larry Charles was the same way. He'd be watching something that he knew was upsetting to him and he wouldn't be able to get out of his mind, but he couldn't bring himself to change the channel often. So he would watch and then just be a stress ball afterwards. He was not happy with that weird nose tube, Larry Charles. He said that it never looked quite right. And I agree. Even every time I watch this episode, I'm going, what is that? They couldn't have found something a little more convincing. Larry David actually had a Blackhawks jacket, so that's where that came from. Okay, so this was interesting to me. Another kind of Elaine storyline on the cutting floor. Elaine had this whole other storyline in this episode where she was reading a Reader's Digest in the waiting room of the ER. Essentially, so in a nutshell, she was reading an article, and when she found out she could go see George, she tried to leave with the Reader's Digest, and they wouldn't let her take it. And they said, no, you can't take this. It's, belongs in the waiting room. It's not for you to take. So she had been reading this article about a woman who had awful BO, like a medical condition that caused her to have awful BO. She wasn't able to finish the article, and she was really very frustrated by that. So that was part of it, too. And then another part, so there was actually more to the whole doctor storyline as well. Larry Charles said that in the original script, now this wasn't cut, this was cut before they even filmed it, but in the original script, the doctor was supposed to be more perverted, more of a fetishist, but that wasn't very network friendly, so they had to cut that out. That would have been really fun to watch. So the tonsils growing back was based on Larry Charles. He said, my tonsils grew back. Oh, I loved this part when Jerry says the comment about the Capulets and the Montagues. Now they put that out there, and that's a reference to Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, in case you didn't know that. And that was a little bit of a risk. Larry Charles said, we put that out there without explaining what that meant. And we just thought either the audience will know or they won't know, or they'll figure it out, they'll look it up, who knows. But that was something really important to particularly Larry Charles, Larry David, and Jerry Seinfeld, to respect the intelligence of the audience, which right away in my brain, I hear George say, I'm not going to dumb it down for some bonehead mass audience. I think that was also their philosophy as well, which is probably why that was written to that episode with George, with the comeback. They wanted to respect that the audience was more intelligent than usually audiences are given credit for. And I really love that. I certainly probably didn't know what that meant at first, but eventually I did. A lot of things I watched when I was little went over my head, but if you're lucky, you can go back to it and be like, that's what that meant. But you kind of got the context of it anyway. It wasn't like someone was lost if they didn't get that reference. So I really like that approach, just assuming your audience is more intelligent than they get credit for. The last thing I wanted to mention that Larry Charles talked about was how the show really, really clicked into place, and the ensemble clicked after Jerry kind of found his sea legs as a sitcom performer. He was really learning on the job, and he was so determined to be good at it. So he worked really hard at knowing everything he needed to know to be a performer on a sitcom, because it was a completely foreign thing to him. And Larry Charles says, look, Jason and Julia came in with a great set of tools. They were actors, they were they're comedic actors. They knew what they were doing. And Jerry and Michael sort of had to evolve into these sitcom performers. Michael Richards was definitely an actor, but not with a very defined character. And Jerry just had to find his groove. And so as soon as he found that groove, it made it easier for the ensemble to find how they click. So I just liked that little mention of what he talked about. There were a couple of deleted scenes, and they involved the Elaine storyline that I talked about. So it was that Reader's Digest article. She's telling Jerry about it in the hospital room. Jerry kind of defends that the people wouldn't let her take it out of the waiting room. He's like, look, that's a waiting room. They have to have magazines. You can't take that away. That's what a waiting room's all about. And then the very last scene, it was a little bit more extended, where Elaine had swiped that same Reader's Digest, and the nurse catches her, the same nurse we see trying to read Jerry's note. She catches her and says, "You're going to give me back that Reader's Digest." But she says, I have to find out what happens to that woman. How am I supposed to find out? And she said, "Oh, the woman with the BO? Psh, I'll tell you. She went to an herbal healer and drank some tea, and her face turned purple and it never went away." Ha ha. They kind of wrap that up. It's a little hacky to me. I'm kind of glad that they cut that out. It's kind of stupid. But anyway, that was some of the deleted material, all Elaine material, unfortunately, but I kind of don't blame them for getting rid of it. It was sort of a nothing story. All right, now to Contributor Corner. Greg, trusty Greg, he sent in some thoughts this week. And the first thing Greg says, "I really like the scene of Jerry, George, and Elaine in the coffee shop. Sitting in a side booth is a real change of pace. It's funny to me how Elaine scolds George for bringing in the outside cucumber, and then she herself cuts up some for her own salad. It's a subtle action that kind of shows how Elaine would never break those societal rules herself, but also wouldn't miss out if the rule has already been broken." Yeah, I did like that too. It was also this kind of like intimate like friendship thing as well to me, where she takes that cucumber. And I guess I didn't see it as her scolding him. She was just more, I felt she was a little bit more like surprised and kind of like, "You bringing your own?" But that was just my interpretation of it. But yes, I did like that she started adding her own slices of cucumber to her salad as well. Moving on, Greg says, "In the hospital, I like how she feigns sympathy for George and then asks for his apartment. Her smile to Jerry after she delivers the line is adorable." Totally adorable. Agreed, Greg. Then next, Greg says, "While this is yet another George episode, I really enjoyed the brief arc of Elaine with the doctor. Very flirty at first, both ways, per usual, and then ultimately a letdown. Elaine is a real close talker when she meets him, and that discussion versus the tonsil versus non-tonsil families was super corny yet cute. I like her little giggle after he tries to walk past her. This actor is what passes as attractive by 1990 standards. Dimpled chin, Gutenberg-esque curly mullet. Probably 29 years old, but looks at best 45. Yes, thank you. This whole time, he's not unattractive, but yes, it's a very time capsuled attractiveness. And I mean, listen, the wall of hair with Elaine, it's not the best look for her either, but she's still adorable. So, and Greg just hit the nail on the head with the 29 years old, but at best looks 45. I guess this is another reason I was just totally blown away with George being 33, because to me, with that fashion and, okay, sorry, let's face it, the balding, he just looks older to me. And beyond all of that, I'm still mentally frozen at the time when I first started watching Seinfeld. So everyone just, for them to be younger than me, it just doesn't make sense. And the next Greg mentions the date with the doctor, though brief and consisting of just his medical monologue whilst holding her tongue, was super cringy. Elaine of later seasons would never let this go on for this long, no matter how into the guy she was. But ultimately, the doctor blew it, and Elaine had no interest in kissing him, which was understandable given how much he had to say about the damn tongue. It's a wonder he's single. I love how she says papillae. Like she was actually listening to everything he said and repeating it in a way that let him know how kissing was not going to happen, and it's his fault for that. Yes, I agree, Greg. She mentions the medical terminology to really emphasize to him, like, what you said is why I'm turned off right now. You blew it. You need to go home with your mullet, basically. And lastly, Greg says, I do like at the end how Elaine, still a good friend, is thoughtful enough to bring George a pint of ice cream despite potentially running into Dr. Tongue. Yes, very sweet. Very, very sweet. I liked that too. Thank you so much, Greg. If you would like to become a contributor to this show, please email elainepodcast@gmail.com. elainepodcast@gmail.com. And you could send in some thoughts for a future episode. Okay, so my favorite Elaine moments. Well, there wasn't a lot of good Elaine stuff in this episode, honestly. Even the deleted scenes weren't anything great, but at least, you know, Julia Louis-Dreyfus had some more to play with that deleted material. But yeah, I don't blame them for getting rid of it. It wasn't very strong. But if I were to pick a favorite Elaine moment, the flirty Elaine. I mean, I'm echoing what Greg said here, but oh gosh, Flirty Elaine is always adorable to me. And I just love how JLD plays it. She just plays it very honest. It's very demonstrative. This is something that I think is always mind-boggling to me, where she can play up a flirty side to this character, but not in like a sex kitten kind of way, not in a gimmicky way, like a Blanche way from Golden Girls. I am not bashing Blanche. I love Blanche, but I'm just saying for the way that JLD brings out that side of Elaine, it's done in such a great, understated yet demonstrative way. I don't know how else to put it, but it just always works. It's always adorable. And it's just another favorite facet of mine to the Elaine character. I mean, she can turn on this flirty side without turning into like this sex kitten stereotype. And my final notes on this episode, it was a very meh episode overall. And especially for Elaine, just not very interesting stuff. She, of course, JLD makes a meal out of whatever she's given, and I loved her performance, but I just wish there was more to it. At least there wasn't a faceless suitor. We got to see the bad date play out, but I would have liked some more time dedicated to her interaction with the doctor. Maybe there should have been a scene at the hospital where she runs into Dr. Tongue, and then we would see awkward Elaine, or maybe it would have been confrontational Elaine calling him out on what a turnoff he talking about her tongue was on the date. I'm not sure, but it would have been interesting to see some more interaction with that, or a little bit more closure to that. And as is my complaint with many of the episodes so far, and it's just not enough quality Elaine stuff. She was given a good storyline. I did like that whole meeting the doctor and going out with the doctor, but it wasn't fleshed out enough because we spent so much time on George visiting Tor, which was hilarious, by the way. Stephen Tobolowsky, those scenes are gold. I mean, really, really funny. No doubt about that. But I really do feel they could have just swapped out so much of that ambulance crap with more doctor and Elaine date. So that ambulance stuff drove me crazy. It was so stupid. All right. Well, I think that's all I can say about the heart attack. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you next time.